Hi, all. Welcome to Tea Time. I'm Dr. T, and today I'm enjoying a nice cup of a Mayan superfood. It's a tea, it's a coffee replacement. So I'll be sipping my tea while we kind of talk today. So today I thought I would talk a bit about social anxiety. And the reason I want to address social anxiety is because it's something that I see all the time. I experience it myself, especially in a world where you are introverted, especially when you're super sensitive to energies, you're empathic. And I see it in kids I work with all the time, especially as a teacher. Social anxiety cripples so many students, and it's a leading cause for substance use and other behaviors that kind of help feel more confident and feel like you can't approach people and be around them and not want to run away and hide in your room and feel bad for it. So I think it's really important to discuss, but I also think it's really important because I remember having this conversation with a mom at my yoga studio a while ago. And everybody there knows I work with youth. They kind of know the work that I do and what I'm passionate about. And she asks me and wonders, well, why are kids today just so anxious? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense because, what do they have to worry about? What is this fear coming from? And she goes on to explain, the era that she lived in. Talking about wars and the fear of being bombed and, all of these other pieces that existed during that generation. And I patiently listened, and I just said, maybe ask why they feel so anxious, because many times when people ask me questions, they're rhetorical. They don't actually want to hear my response. They just want to tell me what they think, and that's totally fine. Sometimes we just need to be heard. But I'm going to kind of go into how I would have answered that question if there would have been open ears for that. And so, social anxiety, right, is this idea that you just don't want to be around people. And really, the root of it is this fear of being negatively evaluated, having people think poorly of you. There's something wrong with you. They're not going to accept you. You're not going to belong. So why am I even going to go out there if everybody is just not going to like me? Like, what's the point? And why am I going to put myself through that torture? And so this anxiety builds up, right? It's this energetic flow. Really, it's more of a block that's like, no, and it makes you really second guess who you are. And so I firmly believe that a big piece of this is intergenerational, right? It's actually something that's passed down. And there's a piece of it that's genetics, maybe 30-40%. There's this kind of genetic piece where maybe you kind of have a predisposition to a social anxiety disorder. But really, it's almost this learned behavior. And social anxiety is something that youth take on within their infant years, in their first 2 years into the maybe 4 years old. This is when they take it on. This is when it comes. And you start to see it more as they socially interact more. So maybe preteens, adolescents. But that doesn't mean that it just showed up then. It was already there. And if you really kind of noticed and paid attention to the little quirks and kind of how your kids started to react or behave or what you would consider misbehave in larger groups or with larger noises, you might have started to notice it earlier. But so I was doing some research and reading some articles around this because, of course, I have opinions, but I'm not going to throw anything out that isn't, kind of founded by some data, doesn't have some kind of real scientific backing. Of course, I'm going to throw some opinions, but I'll make sure that everybody knows that it's an opinion. But I really look into the reactiveness that exists in this world based on the fear that we have, because so many policies, procedures, ways that we approach any type of human being is really coming out of a fear-based place. And that's what turns us into, you know, people who don't see people, who don't see other human beings, who are able to kind of disassociate and create some kind of hierarchy among types of people, which doesn't exist. I mean, it's all the same species. Um, but it's their way of trying to find stability in a world where they don't think that it exists unless they are on top. And of course, that taps into the evolutionary, need to be competitive, to be the best, to be kind of the alpha or whatever. But we are so far beyond that because we have moved into logic and reasoning and emotion, and so we know how to move through that and exist with that, and know that we can kind of be all harmonious. But we really prefer to tap into kind of this old school way of evolution, right? So not evolving, actually, not adapting. And so I find that interesting. Anyway, that is just my science nerd coming out. And this is what happens often. This is where this even tea tie came from, right? In my classrooms, we always just sat and had tea in all of my classes, and there was always the tangent moment, right? What is Dr. T going to talk about today? And it was always based on what they said or something somebody asked me, that made me put my tea down and say, "Oh my gosh, please let's have a conversation about this, because I can't have you walking out of here thinking that is fact-based, or that there's any data that supports that, or that any scientific reasoning or whatever it happened to be." Anyway, so going back to this whole social anxiety, right? This intergenerational thing that's being passed down. Well, most parents have social anxiety also when it comes to their kids, right? There's this fear of negative child evaluation. There's an actual assessment, so you can go and find it, FNCE. You can find a scale and you can take it and figure out where you are on this scale. But it's really this: I'm afraid that when I go out with my kid, that my kid is going to be negatively evaluated by the society that I'm walking into, this place that I'm in, this community that I'm around. And the reason that I'm concerned about that is because I think that reflects the type of parent that I am. Right. So let's think about the parents who are at grocery stores and they have kids in their carts, and they're all of a sudden their kid is screaming because they said no, right? They wanted this toy, or they wanted every toy down the aisle, and a parent said, "No, you don't get to have this." And that's legitimate, right? We're creating nice boundaries and saying, "All right, nope, not your option today." But a typical response for a young child is to be emotional, right? They gotta scream and kick, and that's just what they do. It's how they figure out how this whole thing works, right? And so the parents that let their kids do this, that's fantastic. But the problem is, if you're standing in a line at a grocery store, you've always got that person that's like, "Oh my God, look at their kid," right? And so parents very often are like, "Oh my gosh, I have to shut my kid up." And of course, I am not trying to act like parents are awful human beings or would say this directly to their kids or anything, but just to, paraphrase and get the point across. I need to shut my kid up because this person over here is going to judge my parenting. Right? They're going to think I have no control over my kid because they're kicking and screaming right now. Not, "Oh, well, that's a 2-year-old and that's what they do. That's their developmental stage. This is kind of how they respond and interact with the environment around them." They're very emotional. And so what happens is a few things, right? One, we're telling this kid that's sitting in the cart that they're unable to express emotion, right? No, no, no. Don't do that. Stop right now because I'm embarrassed. I'm looking bad. And I need you to stop, and I'm going to stifle this. And so this is like a beginning, right, of how our society impacts us, which impacts our youth and what we're able to do, right? This is why we don't openly cry. This is why we don't openly get angry. We all put a smile on and pretend like, yeah, I'm good, I'm all right. And we ask each other, how are you? It's not a genuine question. It's a greeting, right? Because heaven forbid you say, how are you? And someone says, oh, I'm actually having a really hard day and I could use some support or somebody to talk to, or I just really don't want to interact right now. It doesn't have anything to do with you, but I just need to be on my own, or I might lash out because I don't know how to navigate this right now. Most people wouldn't really like that or want to stop and take a moment. Which is really unfortunate. But so when we're teaching our youth that, okay, so you're learning at this developmental stage very early on where you're very dependent on what your parents' evaluation of you is, that I am not good when I'm crying. I am not good when I'm emotional. The other thing that you're seeing is that you are noticing your parents' fear reaction to what other people are thinking, feeling, and saying. And so you start to think, okay, well, if, and you start to think as in this 2-year-old or this young person, and anyone who may be thinking, well, there's no way a 2-year-old can do this. Young people, infants, in utero, toddlers are the most receptive beings ever. They observe, they pay attention, they take it all in, and tons of it is subconscious, right? It goes into their brain, it goes into their tissues, it goes into their body. And yes, there is scientific backing to all of this, but it goes into their body. And so here's what happens. At 12 years old, they're having anxiety attacks and they have no idea why. Because they can't pinpoint the fact that when they were 1, 2, 3, 4 years old, their parents' reactions to possible negative evaluations of their child taught their child to constantly be worried of whether they are going to be negatively evaluated in the world. And so it's really fascinating to understand because we have this culture that pushes for perfection. And Madeline Levine is an absolutely phenomenal child psychologist, has written a lot of books and a lot of scholarly articles, and talks about this poison of perfection. And basically what we're doing is we are like pushing not absolute best, but like the perfect best. Like you can only be, not the best for you, but like the best out there. And so you're constantly looking to figure out, how do I make my kid fit this perfection mold so that we, as in me and my child, are fully accepted by everyone and even praised by everyone. And ultimately what that does is it doesn't allow you to see the kid that's in front of you. Right? There's this kid sitting in front of you in this present moment, really trying to navigate their life course and try and say, okay, well, who am I? How am I doing? Like, am I doing all right? What's my feedback here? Maybe I want to be friends with this person. Not anymore. They took my toy. Maybe I want to be friends with this person, so I might want to dye my hair. It really doesn't mean that like I'm going down some crazy stage of like antisocial behavior. It's just me trying to figure out something, right? I mean, if we think about at the time when we get to kind of that preteen stage, right, that where did my child go stage, they have so many mirrors around them of trying to figure out who am I, and their self-worth goes up and down based on these reflections that are coming in these mirrors. But every time they look in them, they might go, all right, I'm going to try and look like that, or I'm going to try and look like that. And that's just how they're navigating kind of their space in this world. That doesn't mean that something's terribly wrong. the way you find that out is really by having open and real conversations, right? We have to talk openly and hold space. But if we hold a space of you have to be perfect, that's never going to happen, because they're never going to feel good enough. They're never going to want to talk to you because you're always going to feel like they're going to disappoint you. One of the biggest kind of points I always give parents is, don't tell kids not to do something because you're going to be disappointed. Because guess what? When they end up doing it, because that's what kids do, right? They won't come talk to you about it, because that is the last thing they ever want to do, is disappoint you. So they scream and yell and get you to stay away from them. And it's not because they're trying to disrespect you. It's because they're so terrified of how they're going to make you feel and how you are going to evaluate them. Now, this whole concept of like having this fear around this negative child evaluation really affects a youth's agency, self-efficacy, right? Self-efficacy is this belief that I can do things. Agency is the actions based on those beliefs, right? So I don't have those, so I really don't ever find autonomy, right? The antithesis of autonomy, right, which is being able to stand on my own 2 feet, kind of exist in this world, fall down, get myself back up, right, navigate my way through some obstacles, and do it on my own, right? I need to be able to do this on my own. It's very good for me to have my safety net, my family, people to support me, but I need to be able to step through these really important obstacles and social experiences on my own, because that's how I really start to gather my character, my values, who am I? And I know I can make it through things. But the antithesis of this autonomy is despairing dependency. I become so incredibly dependent. And all of this, if you think about all of these things, it causes these youth to stay fully and outside of themselves, totally and externally to who they are, because they're spending all of this energy almost in a PTSD state, right? I am constantly paying attention to what might be going on around me. And of course, that's going to take a ton of energy. Dealing with anxiety takes a ton of energy. It causes mass exhaustion. And when we are massively exhausted, we don't take care of ourselves. We don't spend time building an internal home. Right? So you can imagine, as my social anxiety continues, so does my disconnection with myself. The longer that this exists, the more I put into kind of creating some kind of world around me, or some kind of version of myself that'll be accepted, or, you may go the other way where you just don't want to exist in the world. And you might find a way to deal with it. In this study that I was reading, it was talking about the difference of the impact of kind of a mother versus a father, right? Because so often when we talk about, right, I'm passing down this social anxiety, the automatic thought for some reason, just goes to mother, right? It's on the mom. And that's not true. Because evolutionarily, it's kind of always been, dad focuses external environment, mom focuses internal environment. So dad focuses on kind of what's going on out here. I'm going to make sure that, we have a home and that we're safe, and I'm going to go get food and all this stuff. And mom's like, I'm going to feed us. I'm going to make sure our home is nice and comfortable. I'm going to hold you and put you to bed. It's the internal things and versus the external. We're talking very literally here. And evolutionarily, this is not like, this could be the root very much of gender roles. But it's just this kind of innate sense of, okay, so dad does this one thing and mom does this one thing. Mom is kind of my comforting role and dad is supposed to protect me. And I'm totally okay with shifting this, by the way. But that's kind of when there's just a few authors behind this that kind of talk about the reasoning why there's differences in how mom and dad affect this social anxiety pattern. And so the way that dads do this is youth will look to dad to see his fear reactions, right? Because by knowing what he's afraid of and how he reacts to those things, I know what I need to protect myself from. So when dad is going after that snake and getting rid of him, I know that I need to, stay away from the snake. But what happens often, so I mean, understanding kind of that's how the dad role fits in there. So if you are a dad or father figure, or I mean, fitting into whatever that is, and I'm not even attaching a gender to this, right? Just a father role, whatever that looks like. Right. It's what am I going after and what am I making my child fearful of, right? By my actions, because they're paying attention and they're watching. So you could totally shift that, right? Snakes not something to be terrified of and go and attack and kill with a shovel. But let me teach you about different kinds of snakes. Okay. And I'm going to go release this one here. This one be careful of, right? But there doesn't need to be this need of like, I'm going to react and just attack. So we have these moments all the time to teach what it is to be empathetic and understanding and connected to the whole world around us, including things that are not human. Nature itself, nature is like one of the best remedies for social anxiety. So I'll push this in any kind of talk I ever do. Because we are so incredibly disconnected from nature. It's insane. And so my little snake example kind of just worked into that, didn't plan it. So mom typically will come in with this social anxiety. The impact of mom typically happens earlier, but you don't see the effects until later. A lot of what this fear leads to is over control. I try to control everything my child's doing. I try to make sure they don't make the same mistakes that I did. I try to make sure they're not me, right? Because there's something that I have wrong with who I was. Still struggle with it, obviously. Otherwise, this thought would be there. And so we try to overprotect. We become overbearing. And again, this is a recipe for that despairing dependency, this belief that I cannot do anything on my own. And really, a really poor self-evaluation. That is another piece that comes in this world, right? When we're dealing with fear is this overprotectiveness. And it's actually incredibly detrimental to our youth, our kids in general, because we don't let them fall down and get back up on their own. And by not doing that, they're just constantly afraid of what's going to happen to them because they don't know. And they don't know and they don't believe that if they were to fall down, that they could get back up. So they're going to avoid it at all costs. And if they do fall down, a lot of times they stay there. If they get to this point where they're over-controlled and they're just treated and taught through their whole life to expect negative evaluation. And so I just wanted to talk about this. I don't know. I just was, like I said, I was reading this article. I get these questions and I just feel like, all right, so social anxiety is just all over the place. I don't know. I really don't know many people who can tell me they do not have social anxiety. And it keeps us so focused outside of this moment in time, right? It keeps us so focused on seeing a child that doesn't even exist. Because I'm trying to focus on the future. I'm trying to focus on another version that it isn't even here. And so we constantly are just never connected with what's actually going on. We're just creating this narrative. And until we really start to shift right? How am I going to respond? I'm going to feel into this, right? And this doesn't mean you need to be a perfect parent, right? That doesn't exist, right? I'm a huge advocate for being the perfectly imperfect parent, being human, right? Showing that you make mistakes, because what you are doing, you're showing them how I mess up and then get through it, right? My life didn't end. Everything wasn't over. And so they're able to see, okay, it doesn't mean that they're going to have a negative evaluation of you. Absolutely not. It's teaching them something. They're not at a place when they're young to make these judgments. Okay? And they might love everything or hate everything, and they may tell you they hate you. That doesn't mean that they actually hate you. It's them going, well, what happens when I say this? Okay. And our responses, our disclosure moments, every time we get told something or something gets said to us, what are we going to do with that? And if we don't respond perfectly, are we going to actually come back and say, wow, I made a mistake? Are we going to try and maintain that we are perfect? Or that nothing happened, because if it didn't happen, if we don't talk about it, it never happened. Please don't do that. Please don't do that. I don't know how many conversations I've had around with youth where they talk about moments where parents acted like it didn't happen, one, because they didn't know how to talk about it, or because they needed to pretend like it didn't happen. And that just reinforced to that child that they were never going to be good enough. So, I mean, if you have questions, if you want to talk about this more, let me know. I will continue tea time talking about random things that come up, random research that I kind of come across, or who knows, musings, maybe, perhaps. Maybe I'll talk about my bulldogs one day. But I hope everybody has an awesome day. And yeah, let me know if you have questions. Peace.